The fluorescent lights of memorial hospitals, emergency room flickered. Like dying stars as Margaret Chen pressed her trembling hand against the cold glass of the waiting room window. Outside, the city sprawled beneath a bruised October sky, indifferent to her silent terror. She had built an empire from nothing, a tech company worth billions. Her face on magazine covers, her name whispered in boardrooms across the world. But none of it mattered now. Not the penthouse, not the stock options, not the power, because in 30 minutes they would wheel her into surgery, and she might never wake up. The diagnosis had come 3 weeks ago, delivered in the sterile monotone of a surgeon who'd probably delivered the same news 1,000 times before. Aggressive brain tumor, emergency surgery required. High risk. She'd nodded, signed papers, made arrangements with the cold efficiency that had made her a legend in Silicon Valley. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail: she had no one. No family. Her parents had passed years ago. No children. She'd traded that possibility for quarterly earnings reports. Her friends were really business, associates who'd stopped calling when she took a leave of absence. Her assistant sent flowers with a card that felt like it came from a PR department. And now, sitting in this waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and fear, Margaret Chen, the woman who'd given a TED Talk on fearlessness, who'd stared down hostile takeovers and board rebellions, was utterly, devastatingly alone. Ms. Chen, a nurse, appeared, clipboard in hand, sympathy creasing her tired features. "We need to go over your post-op care instructions. Who will be taking you home? Who's your emergency contact? You'll need someone to stay with you for at least 72 hours. The words hit like physical blows. Margaret's throat constricted. I'll hire someone, a private nurse. I can." "That's not how this works," the nurse said gently. "You need someone who cares about you. Someone who'll notice if something goes wrong. Someone who'll be there when you're scared at 3 in the morning. Someone who cares." The phrase echoed in the hollow chamber of Margaret's chest. "I don't have anyone," she whispered, the admission tasting like ash. For the first time in 20 years, tears streaked down her face. "Please, I'll pay anything. I'll sign anything. Just don't leave me here alone." The nurse's expression softened with a pity that made Margaret want to scream. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the antiseptic air, rough, hesitant, distinctly human. "I'll stay with her." Margaret's head snapped up. Standing near the vending machines was a man she'd barely noticed. Before, mid-30s, wearing a wrinkled flannel shirt and jeans with paint stains on the knees. His dark hair was disheveled, exhaustion carved deep lines around his eyes, and a sleeping child, maybe 5 years old, rested against his shoulder, tiny fingers clutching a stuffed elephant. "Excuse me?" The nurse turned surprised. The man shifted the child gently, stepping forward. "I said I'll stay with her. If she needs someone." His eyes met Margaret's, brown, warm, carrying their own weight of weariness and loss. "Nobody should go through this alone." Margaret stared at him, confusion momentarily overwhelming her fear. I don't know you." "Jake Morrison." He offered a tired smile. "And you're right. You don't. But I've been in these chairs for 6 hours waiting, while they run tests on my daughter, Emma. She's okay. Just a bad flu. Thank God. But I've had a lot of time to think. And I heard what you said." "You don't understand what you're offering," Margaret began. But Jake shook his head. "My wife died 2 years ago, cancer. And in those final weeks, when I was falling apart, when I didn't know how to be strong for Emma and say goodbye to Sarah all at once, you know what saved us? Strangers. People who barely knew us who showed up with casseroles. Neighbors who drove Emma to preschool. Sarah's oncologist who held my hand and cried with me when it was over." His voice cracked slightly. "I understand exactly what I'm offering." The nurse looked between them, clearly out of protocol territory. "Sir, post-operative care is serious business." "It's not just—" "I'm a licensed EMT," Jake interrupted quietly. "Or I was before I became a full-time dad. I know how to monitor vitals, recognize warning signs, administer medication. I can handle it." He looked back at Margaret. "And more importantly, I know what it's like to be terrified and alone. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." Margaret felt something crack, open in her chest, some sealed chamber she'd closed off years ago when she decided that success meant self-sufficiency, that needing people was weakness. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. You don't even know me. I could be anyone. Jake's smile was sad and knowing. You're not anyone. You're someone who's scared, and you asked for help, which probably took more courage than anything else you've ever done. He glanced down at Emma, still sleeping peacefully against him. Besides, Sarah made me promise something before she died. She made me swear I'd teach Emma that the world isn't just what we take from it. It's what we give. And that kindness doesn't need a reason. The nurse looked at Margaret, eyebrows raised in question. This was insane. This violated every rule Margaret had built her life around. You don't trust strangers. You don't accept charity. You don't let people see you weak, vulnerable, broken. But maybe those rules had left her here, powerful, successful, and utterly alone. Okay, Margaret breathed, the word barely audible. Then stronger. Okay, thank you. What followed was a blur of surgical prep, consent forms, and the slow descent into anesthesia. But the last thing Margaret saw before the world went dark wasn't the surgical lights or the masked faces of doctors. It was Jake Morrison standing outside the operating room window, Emma now awake and waving at her with innocent enthusiasm. Both of them staying, two strangers who'd chosen, for no reason except basic human decency, to be there. The surgery took 7 hours. When Margaret woke, groggy, nauseous, her head wrapped in bandages, Jake was there. He'd somehow procured a more comfortable chair, and Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring in a princess coloring book and humming quietly. Over the next 3 days, Jake Morrison kept his word. He monitored her medication, schedule with the precision she usually reserved for product launches. He helped her walk when her balance failed, catching her before she fell and not mentioning the tears that came from frustration and fear. He made terrible jokes that made her laugh despite the pain. Emma, with the unself-conscious compassion of children, brought Margaret drawings and told her elaborate stories about her stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunks. And slowly, in that small apartment Jake had driven her to, not the penthouse, because she couldn't manage the stairs yet, something shifted. Margaret told Jake about the company she'd built, and he listened without awe or agenda. Jake talked about Sarah, about how grief ambushed him in grocery store aisles and during bedtime stories, and Margaret listened without platitudes or discomfort. On the 4th morning, when the worst danger had passed, Margaret sat at Jake's kitchen table, scratched formica, nothing like her custom Italian marble, and watched him make pancakes while Emma explained the intricate social dynamics of kindergarten. "Why did you really do this?" Margaret asked quietly. Jake flipped a pancake, considering. "Sarah used to say that we're all just walking each other home. That life is too hard to do alone, and too precious to waste on being alone." He met her eyes. "I guess I wanted to prove to myself that she was right, that even after losing her, even when everything felt dark, there was still light to be found in helping someone else find their way." Margaret felt tears slip down her face, not from pain this time, but from something breaking open. "I've spent 20 years building walls," she whispered. "I thought that's what strength was." "Strength is asking for help," Jake said simply. "Everything else is just fear wearing a power suit." 3 months later, Margaret Chen stood before her board of directors and announced a new initiative. A foundation dedicated to supporting patients who faced medical crises alone, connecting them with volunteers and resources. She donated $50 million to start. It wasn't enough to repay one stranger's kindness, but it was a beginning. Jake Morrison still drove his beat-up pickup truck and still made terrible pancakes. But now, Emma had an additional adult in her life who showed up for school plays and birthday parties, a fierce, brilliant woman who'd learned that success measured in kindness mattered more than any quarterly report. Because sometimes salvation comes not from strength, but from surrender. Not from having all the answers, but from being brave enough to say, "I need help. Please don't leave me here alone." And sometimes, if you're extraordinarily lucky, a stranger steps forward and says, "You don't have to be."